Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. The Associated Press has spotlighted best-selling author Alex Finlay, author who's earned a reputation for producing suspenseful, fast-paced thrillers, spotlighting What Have We Done among their favorites as reflective of his overall writing formula, where his characters are well drawn, his writing is tight and vivid, and he keeps readers guessing with a series of twists and red herrings all the way to his new yarn's violent conclusion. Breaking into the mainstream almost from the top of his career, Cosmopolitan cheered on The Night Shift as a darkly gripping tale where Newsweek raved that Finlay has outdone himself with this latest. He grabs readers from the very first line and keeps them propulsively turning pages with absolutely thrilling cliffhangers. While Every Last Fear, CNN promised would have fans of psychological thrillers anxious for this page turner. American lawyers admired of his legal trilogy over The Last Justice, The Outsider, and The Advocate's Daughter, that the details of life and the practice of law in Washington, D.C. are dead on. And more recent thrillers like If Something Happens to Me, Publishers Weekly declared to be a smart, unpredictable winner. And he joins us today to talk about it all. Alex, welcome to the show. Growing up, could we have found you reading Tom Clancy thrillers as much as, say, Stephen King or the Hardy Boys?
Yeah, I bounced around a bit. I wasn't the most voracious reader as a kid. I was in a military family. We moved every couple years. And so, you move into a new town in the summer, it could be pretty lonely. So, I did pick up reading then, but I wasn't from a family of, big readers. I'd take my dad would have a Stephen King book around once in a while, and I'd poke into that. And then otherwise, I was into music. I was in bands, and that was a little my form of storytelling at the time. And over the years, I don't even really know what led me to go, hey, I'm going to try and write a full-length novel. Just one of these things that happened, and I found a real love for it.
Now, you'd become quite a successful appellate lawyer in Washington, D.C. before transitioning into your second career as a best-selling novelist. And in fact, your first thrillers were a legal trilogy published under Anthony Franz that featured your first novel, The Last Justice. The Outsider, which James Patterson promised was as suspenseful as any John Grisham novel. And The Advocate's Daughter, which Jack Reacher creator Lee Child endorsed as a smart, sophisticated, suspenseful, and written with real insider authenticity. Please talk about how art began to imitate life and what you poured from your legal career into the characters and cases that readers enjoyed from these first three novels.
I was in bands in high school and even in college, and that's what I thought I was going to do. And at some point you realize that maybe you're not as good as good enough to make that. But I did have people along the way that I was not a great high school student. I went to four high schools. We moved a lot, and it wasn't until college that I realized, well, I have to turn this around. And I had some professors who took an interest in me, and kind of made me feel like, wow, I can do this. And kind of once I found that something I was interested in, which in college I kind of had a couple law classes, it took off from there, and I really applied myself. And the next thing you know, you're graduating law school and practicing law. You mentioned John Grisham. I think John Grisham, for a lot of lawyers who have the inkling of being writers, he was a big part. Right when I was in law school, The Firm came out, and the Scott Turow's Presumed Innocent were like the two big novels at the time. And I remember really loving them. They were a great escape from the pressure of law school. But it just hadn't dawned on me at the time to write. And then somewhere along the way, I had an idea for a story, and I just started giving it a go. But it took a lot of years. I have a novel that was never published, and it was a lot of trial and error, and a lot of riding on the subway on the way to and from my law practice. It's where it really began in earnest. And yeah, and you get, and the one cool thing about being a lawyer is you meet a lot of interesting people, you learn secrets, you see industries, or meet fascinating individuals who you might not otherwise meet. It's a lot of life experiences that I think help feed the fictional world that we end up kind of just taking all these things that we've experienced and morphing them into these stories we tell. I'm a paper lawyer. I'm an appellate lawyer. So when I get a case, it's already gone through the ringer of the legal system. Usually there's been a lot of either a full trial or heavy, in a big case, lots of motions and a lot of issues. But by the time it comes to me, I have to take this mass of information, and boil it down to, usually 30 to 40 pages and tell a story. And so I do think that that training over the years of having to do that and take all these, bits and pieces of what, the record of the facts, but also the law, and put this puzzle together and do it in a way that's interesting, that the judges, appellate judges, get mountains of paper. And so you've got to make it snappy, you've got to make it interesting, and you've got to really, I think, tell the story, because that's, at the end of the day, I as a lawyer, I still believe that it's the story that carries the day, even in a boring appeal. Readers who don't know, or viewers who don't know, I wrote my first three books under my real name. Alex Finley's a pen name. And so my first three books were legal thrillers set in the Supreme Court community in Washington, D.C., which I, knew a little bit about, and I found it kind of fascinating. And so those first three books are really Supreme Court centric. And that if The Last Justice was my first published novel, and the premise is on, the opening pages, a gunman, kills nearly the entire Supreme Court, and the story centers around why that is and who did it. But yeah, that scene, I think, being in the Supreme Court, if for anyone who's ever in Washington and who hasn't been, it's a great, thing to go sit and watch. Even, you can get a line, watch 5 minutes of an argument. That it is both a kind of, I always feel, even now going in there, very kind of patriotic, that this is how, for whatever your opinions on the justices and everything, this is how our country, in a civilized way, deals with the biggest issues of the day. And you may not agree with how they come out, but it is in a peaceful kind of way that we handle our social and legal issues. But it's a great experience. And I think when I was in there looking around, I just thought, this is, an interesting setting. And, I had no, now, as far as the plot itself goes, it was just a dynamic way to start a book, and it kind of went from there. I always thought that the Supreme Court, there's a lot of for writers, there's small towns are a setting, for a great setting for a lot of reasons, for a lot of writers. And I felt like the Supreme Court community, it's, there's 400 people that work in this palace basically, and they have a gift shop, they have a cafeteria, they, the library. And so there was a lot to mine in that, like, insular community, which includes not just the justices, but the law clerks and everyone who works there, and the lawyers. um and there was an endless supply. There's so many books about the Supreme Court. The building has all these little quirky, interesting things about it. The obviously the issues that the court deals with, the justices' own personalities and outside lives. And so there was a lot to mine. I just got to a point after three books, when I was considering my next stage of my writing career, I just thought I had said what I want to say, and done what I could do with that world. And that's what led me really to Every Last Fear. And I started writing under a pen name, just to really distinguish my commercial thrillers that have not really legal based, from my original books. And I'll say that, like, the Finlay books are really where I think I found my voice as a writer. Strangely enough, I always was kind of I'll write what I know type person. But it was only when I branched out and did something totally different that I found so many more readers, and had, a much more successful career as a thriller writer.
Now, it must have been thrilling to thereafter walk through a courthouse or a law library and see one of your colleagues or peers reading one of your books, say on their lunch break.
Everything in publishing happens so slow. So as you know, it's kind of a slow moving experiences. For me, the most gratifying thing has been, after practicing law for 20 odd years, joining this other community, this other profession of professionals, writers, and getting to know so many writers. And we all kind of we have this joint, shared experience of, there's been it's a roller coaster. Even after you've been successful, there's ups and downs. And so you have all these kindred spirits who have been through it. And it's just, as a guy my age, making new friends at this period of my life, it's a great thing, because it used to be that, in college you have all your friends, but once you have kids, you tend to hang out with their friends' parents, and so becoming part of a writing community has been really gratifying, and hearing from readers has been super, just fun to have people send you notes or follow, just even the reviews. You're just kind of fascinated, particularly in the beginning, that anybody would care enough to review your work. And so it's all been really one of the joys of my life.
Turning the page to Every Last Fear, which BuzzFeed before its release spotlighted as a highly anticipated thriller that has layers of mystery and intrigue. And it was very clever from the way you wrapped your plot around a documentary film from a student filmmaker who made it in an effort to free his imprisoned brother and loses his parents and two younger siblings mysteriously in Mexico, at the same time pursuing the same aim. Did you pull from the headlines here and plotting this one and then start writing away on a story that the New York Times promised was high energy?
Netflix had this documentary a few years ago called Making a Murderer. And, part of that case involved this juvenile who confessed to the crime. And anyone who's watched the documentary, I think, was kind of shocked by how that confession came about. And it just so happened that in my law practice, I was asked to do what's called an amicus brief in support of that defendant in the Supreme Court. And I represented a group of really prominent prosecutors who basically asked the court to take the case because they found it was kind of just outrageous what happened. And these are prosecutors; these weren't defense lawyers who were saying this. In the process of writing that brief, really had to learn a lot about false confessions, and there's all these studies that most of us would think, oh, I would never confess to a crime I didn't commit, and nobody would do that. But it turns out that it happens all the time. DNA has really kind of shined a light on how many people confess to crimes they didn't commit, and when it's a teenager, it's just the numbers are just kind of jaw dropping. And so that kind of started the seed of the idea for there is a character, the main character's brother in Every Last Fear has confessed to a crime, and there's a community of people who believe that he didn't do it, and that's kind of the heart of the story of this young man's journey into his brother's case and other things that happened to his family because of that case.
Now, any of us who grew up in the 1980s or 90s remember the glory era of blockbuster video, the best. And Reader's Digest celebrated your co-starring it as a character in the backdrop of a story that they felt encompassed the genres of thriller, mystery, and horror. It's a novel that'll stick with you. Why did it feel like an irresistible setting to you for your next thriller? This is one where Newsweek declared after finishing you had outdone yourself with in The Night Shift.
Blockbuster, I love Blockbuster. I think there was a documentary called The Last Blockbuster I had seen, and I thought it was just interesting. There's this one left, and it brings back such great memories for me and so many people, going there on a Friday night. You can just obviously watch anything you want in the world virtually at the, just log in on your computer or your television. But back then, you just had that experience. It was the wild, what's going to be out new, and are they going to have a copy of it, and just a kind of family experience. Or I was dating my wife at the time. I remember going there on Friday nights, and it was just a really fond memory. So I thought that would be, there were some nostalgia aspects of that, but I also thought it was like kind of an interesting setting to have something awful happen. The idea for that book, and those who haven't read it, is basically New Year's Eve, 1999, Blockbuster Video, and bunch of teenagers working. Someone comes after hours, marches them all in the break room, and basically murders them all, except for there's one survivor. 15 years later, same town, different type of setting, an ice cream store, again, workplace attack, one survivor. And the story is about these two survivors kind of coming together to see if the crimes are connected and kind of work through their trauma together. And but I got the idea for it when I lived in the DC area, and my wife and I were in Georgetown, which is a neighborhood in DC, and we went in just to get a Starbucks. And while we were waiting for our coffee, I noticed this mural on the wall, and it was a mural to basically a dedication to these employees who, 20 years ago, had been marched in the back room of the store and murdered. And they didn't catch the person for years. And it just started the seed of this idea of, what an insidious crime it is. The stakes are, you're going to get hardly any money. It's a lot of young people who tend to work these types of jobs at night, and just the senselessness of it stuck with me, and that was the seed of the idea.
Now, you've been praised since early in your career for the authenticity with which you create the legal characters that appear on the page. What have you found more fun within your thrillers about being able to write any sort of antagonist or hero, or a character in general, any way you want to?
It's kind of the freeing thing. As a lawyer, as a appellate lawyer, I get the facts I get. What happened, happened. If it's a good fact, great. If it's a bad fact, you have to find ways to make it seem less bad. But the fun thing about being a writer is if there's something that just the fact isn't good or it's not working out how I want, I can just kill somebody. I can just, there's all kinds of things you can just do with your imagination to deal with the type of issues that arise, unlike in the real world. But yeah, so a lot of this comes back to my law practice and things that have happened along the way, and it's the fun part. I mean, where and it's also a challenge. You have characters who are little kids, you have characters who are women or are from a different backgrounds or race than I have, and so you want to do your best to be respectful to people who are different from you, but to make readers really feel for these people, feel that they are authentic, real people. And it's a challenge, but it's also a great, fun if when you think you've pulled it off.
Now, the Associated Press in their cover story focused in on the release of What Have We Done, where they honed in on the opening scene of 5 teenagers who stood together in the dark and took turns firing a .22 caliber pistol into a shallow grave, before then making the important point that who they killed and why is not revealed until late into this suspenseful thriller. Along the way from writing them as teenagers into their adulthood a quarter century later. How challenging and satisfying is it when you pull it off as you did here, telling a story from multiple points of view that the AP rave keep readers guessing, with a series of twists and red herrings all the way to this new yarn's violent conclusion?
It's a great question in that, all my books have basically different point of view characters, and at some point their stories merge and come together, hopefully in a satisfying way. It's a little, I do it in a little different ways. When I write a book, the idea of writing a full book is very intimidating. I don't know that I'd ever start if I thought of the project as just this big, 300 to 400 page thing I'm going to do. So I always think of the book as I've got the beginning, I've got the middle, and I've got the end. And I take it in those chunks. And so I'll just start with the beginning. And that's where I kind of, the characters kind of, I usually start with an idea for a prologue that sets the stage. And then I have to go, well, who's going to tell this story, and how, who are they? And that's how the characters come about. And so, and I tend to have at least 3 or 4 characters you're following. And I do it in different ways. In that part 1, I'll usually start writing several chapters of one character just to get a feel for them. And then I'll move on to another one. And at some point, then I kind of mix them up. I'll break a chapter where it just feels natural, or where I find it like, oh, it'll be interesting to move to somebody else. And one of the things I really enjoy about multi-perspective books is it keeps me interested. It's like, when I did my legal thrillers, they tended to be from one perspective, the whole book. Multi-perspective are fun because when you get tired of a character or a scene, you can just go on to someone else. And I think that helps with the readers as well. They, and it also has a natural cliffhanger effect that, they're going to move it to somebody else. Well, they're in their mind, like, well, what happened with this other person where we just left them? And so I think for a thriller, when you want to keep the momentum going, you want the pages to turn, it's a real helpful kind of way to go about it. It was the first time I integrated a guy in a band. He was in an 80s, Donnie was in an 80s rock band. He's now playing cruise ships, and that was kind of fun for me to revisit and talk to old friends who played in the Philadelphia scene where Donnie played, and that kind of thing. So that I think was the most fun about that book. It was also one of my more action-packed books, whereas The Night Shift, I'd say, is more of a psychological thriller, and it dealt a lot with people dealing with trauma. Whereas What Have We Done? It's a kind of actiony, fun, over the top to be sure, but kind of something I hadn't really tried yet, and so I had a lot of fun writing it. But Donnie was my favorite because I got to go back to my old music roots and the music, the 80s and 90s references and things like that.
What's your advice for writing action scenes when they're needed?
I'm not a great action scene writer. I have a friend named Barry Lancet. He's a great writer, and he is really he's takes he does martial arts, and he's really great at them. So I'll get some advice. He'll look at my pages and give me some tips on that because I don't feel like I'm a great fight scene person. But I think the advice with anything with people who are trying to get published is just read a lot. It's like it is a cliche, but I don't know any established or published author who doesn't read a lot in their genre, and or outside their genre as well. But I mean, I'm now a much bigger reader than I ever was before I was a writer.
Publishers Weekly welcomed the release of your latest novel as one where Finlay returns with a tightly coiled spine tingler about a law student under suspicion for his high school girlfriend's disappearance. As you sat down to write Ryan Richardson's story, what keeps the writing process exciting for you when you're creating the kind of work where they know that, as in Finlay's previous novels, relentless pacing, impressive characterizations, and the author's knack for surprise combine to produce top-shelf entertainment inside of Something Happens to Me?
Yeah, if something happens to me, begins with you meet this young guy named Ryan, who he just graduated high school. He's parked at like a lover's lane with his high school girlfriend. It's kind of a goodbye. They're both going off to different colleges, a romantic type of scene. And next thing you know, car door rips open. He's hit on the head and dragged from the car. He awakes, it's daylight out, he's in the grass, it's morning, car's gone, girlfriend's gone, and they're just never, for the next 5 years, there's no sign of them anywhere. And the natural thing that would happen is everyone thinks maybe he did something to her, like that he was the last person with her. It's always the husband, always the boyfriend, always the significant other type mentality sometimes. And so he lives under this cloud of suspicion so much, and he's harassed on the internet, and so much so that he changes his name. And we kind of meet him 5 years later. He just finished his first year of law school. He's on a trip abroad with his friends, still kind of traumatized by the whole event from those years ago. And he thinks he sees the man who took his girlfriend, and that's where the story jumps off. And along the way, we meet a character named Poppy, who's like a doing her first case as a deputy sheriff in the small Midwestern town where Ryan is from. And we meet a man named Shane O'Leary, who is and his circle of criminal friends, who is from Philadelphia, and he is not he's a dangerous person. And so we follow them, and ultimately how these three lives intersect to understand what happened to Ryan's girlfriend.
It must have been amazing utilizing the backdrop of Europe here. Did you travel there yourself to write those sections of the book, or in advance to do on-the-ground research?
I had never done really a European setting, and so it's set part in Kansas. I thought a contrast for that would be having Ryan on this trip in Italy. It started with me having a trip in Italy when I was finishing the book, What Have We Done? I was, there, and that book has nothing to do with Italy, but I always thought, well, this would be a cool setting. And then I finished the novel in Paris, and so I naturally wanted to weave that into the story, which I did. And while I was in Paris for this little extended period, which I had gone to just to finish the book, my wife and I went to this small village I had lived in the UK as a boy, and I hadn't been back in 40 years, and because I'd always thought there was a church in this little hamlet about 2 hours from London, that had always stuck with me, and I thought, oh, it would be interesting to integrate that into the story. So that's in the book as well. So it was a little bit of personal travel that inspired settings, but also just things that had stuck with me for 40 years in in a town that really hasn't changed that much, honestly, since I used to run around there as a kid.
The Big Thrill has congratulated you amid your success for, instead of succumbing to the pressure that comes with it, embracing the buzz and the tension as you transferred all that potential angst into your characters. What in that spirit can fans look forward to within the way you do so in your next novel?
Yeah. I mean, I'm on a book a year schedule, which is pretty common for the mystery thriller genre. And it's funny, as you mentioned, it's, by the time I'm out talking about a book, I'm almost done with the next book. And it's been a year since I finished the book. So you have to you'd think you'd remember everything about a story you've written. But for me, I typically, before I go on tour, I listen to the audiobook just to get my head back in. And it's amazing how many things you forget that you've written yourself. And so I'm in the final stages of finishing my next book, tentatively titled Parents Weekend, and it is a story about these five couples who go to their kids' freshman year in college Parents Weekend, and their kids all disappear. And so it's what we follow each family in the days before and during the disappearance, to learn about what would cause five college kids to just basically disappear from any all view. Seeing how the social media has been kind of the podcasters and the TikTokers and amateur sleuths have gotten involved in that process. I thought that was interesting and something I'm trying to work into the book.
Finally, before we run, any TV or movie adaptations on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, it's always fun. It's the only thing my kids are impressed about is if somebody's making a movie or a TV show out of my books. But yeah, I the Every Last Fear is in development, and What Have We Done and is option, and the others are option. So you never know what's going to happen. But and you basically just cross your fingers as the writer. They're not, I'm not involved in anything that's going on, but it would be fun to see some of them hit the screen.
It has been great talking today. Thanks so much for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this.